Alright, let's move on. Where are we in God's prophetic clock? Let's have a look at this church age. How does it fit in with God's plan for Israel and the nations and the end times? How does it fit in with the biblical feasts and the agricultural cycle of harvest and rainfall? We read in Exodus 19 that the law came at Pentecost or Shavuot, which is in the third month. It says in verse 1, in the third month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai. And ye shall, and then 5 verses later, in verse 6, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and an holy nation. And this is promised to us in 1 Peter 2:9. Another indication that God's program for Israel continues within the church, because within the church are the house of Israel. Not just spiritual Israel, but the actual bloodline descendants of Israel. So God is fulfilling the promise to the patriarchs and the promises to in the law at Mount Sinai. He's fulfilling it now. What he promised to Israel, that Israel would be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, is actually being fulfilled now. We are that kingdom of priests, according to the order of Melchizedek, which doesn't get rid of the Levitical priesthood. And be ready against the third day, for the third day the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. So Pentecost in the third month is when the law came down on Mount Sinai. And in Jeremiah 31 verses 31 to 33 we read, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I'll make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they break, although I was an husband unto them, saith the Lord. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith the Lord, I'll put my law in their inward parts, and write it in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people. So the new covenant is basically taking the Torah and writing it upon our hearts. He's not getting rid of the Torah. That same Torah, he's getting rid of the envelope it was contained in it. It was contained in an envelope that had curses attached to it. And he's put it in a new envelope, sealed by the Holy Spirit, in the blood of Yeshua, with better promises. But it's the same Torah law. Because the law is spiritual, and it's promised to both the house of Israel and the house of Judah. So that means the house of Israel and the house of Judah must be distinct entities and separate from one another until such time as God puts them together. But he makes the new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. And during Pentecost, in Acts chapter 2, the Holy Spirit comes and begins the process of writing the law upon our heart. At the very same commemoration, Pentecost, Shavuot, as the law came down at Mount Sinai. So God is beginning to fulfill his promise. The people who are not a people, I will sow her unto me in the earth, and I will have mercy upon her that had not obtained mercy. And I will say to them which were not my people, thou art my people, and they shall say, thou art my God. And this verse is quoted in the New Testament. So you can see what's coming. What the New Testament is. It's a fulfillment of the promises, both of the prophets and of the books of Moses, the Torah, the Tenach. It's all combined. All those promises are coming together in the New Testament. So it says in Hosea, come and let us return unto the Lord. Hosea 6 verses 1 to 4. Come and let us return unto the Lord, For he hath torn, and he will heal us. He hath smitten, and he will bind us up. After 2 days will he revive us. And the third day he will raise us up, and we shall live in his sight. Then shall we know, if we follow on to know the Lord. His going forth is prepared as the morning, and he shall come unto us as the rain, as the latter and former rain unto the earth. O Ephraim, what shall I do unto thee? O Judah, what shall I do unto thee? For your goodness is as the morning cloud, and as the early dew it goeth away. So Judah and Ephraim, or the house of Israel and the house of Judah, they're not... it doesn't take long for them to go astray. And but he says that after 2 days he will revive us, and in the third day he will raise us up. Well, it's been 2 days since the dispersion of Judah from the land, the house of Judah. Although there's always been a small contingent of Jews in the Holy Land for the, most of the last 2,000 years, the bulk of them have been outside of the land. And the house of David has not been restored, and there's no temple worship in all the last 2,000 years. But there's coming a restoration. And the lost tribes have actually been lost for 2,775 or somewhat years, depending on how you calculate it. And so that's almost 3 days, if you like, because a day is like 1,000 years, as we will read shortly. A day is like 1,000 years. It says that in 2 Peter 3:8. After 2,000 years he will revive us. That is, after the second day, i.e. during the third day. His coming signified by the early and latter rain during the agricultural cycle. So God's giving us clues in Hosea that God's going to restore after 3 days, after the third day. Very interestingly, when the house of Israel split from the house of Judah in 1 Kings chapter 12, they said, after 3 days we'll come back and talk to you. And you could take that figuratively to refer not just to 3 days we'll come to talk to you to see if we stay together during that time, but in 3,000 years we'll come back. Because a day is like 1,000 years. And after 3,000 years, within that 3,000 year period, that after 2 days, or after 2,000 years, he'll revive us, and on the third day he'll raise us up. So it's during that third day that we're in now. His coming is signified by the early and latter rain during the agricultural cycle. The early and latter rain are also related to the massive outpouring of the Holy Spirit in the last days. So what was talked about in Hosea about that agricultural cycle, the prophet is really telling us, or the Holy Spirit is really telling us of the fulfillment of the feasts and the fulfillment of that latter rain. So the outpouring of the Holy Spirit in Acts chapter 2 was a partial down payment, but the fullness of the new covenant has not yet come. But there's a final outpouring of the Holy Spirit which will bring the new covenant in its completion. And we read about that in Joel chapter 2 verse 38. We'll look at this shortly. Okay, so in Deuteronomy 11:14, we're told that I will give you the rain of your land in his due season, the first rain and the latter rain, that thou mayest gather in thy corn and thy wine and thine oil. Now, during these last 2,000 years, during the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, the rain that came in Acts chapter 2, and through the revivals and moves of God's Spirit over the last 2,000 years, we've been gathering in the corn, we've been gathering in the grain. And it says, I'll sift the house of Israel amongst all nations, but not the least grain will fall to the ground. So God's been gathering in the grain, and we'll look at this shortly. And in order for that, you need the former and latter rains to start and finish the crops. So let's have a look at the harvest cycle, the former and latter rain and how that fits in with the feasts in Leviticus 23. We have the first three feasts, Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits, and they're related to the first coming of the Messiah, and that they occur in the first month. And then 50 days after is Pentecost and or Shavuot, and that's when the outpouring of the Holy Spirit occurred in Acts chapter 2. And then on the seventh month we have trumpets, Day of Atonement, or Tabernacles, or Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. The Day of Trumpets is called Rosh Hashanah these days, the head of the year by the Jews, because it's the head of the year in terms of the Jubilee years and the sabbatical years are calculated during that period of time. The period in between is the 4 months of harvest. That's the dry summer period. And during these last 2,000 years, this Pentecostal period has been about gathering in the wheat. Yeshua says the field is white unto harvest. Well, it was white unto harvest then. I think we're coming towards the end of that harvest period. The wheat's being brought in. And just before the harvest, we had the Malkush, the spring rain. And in the autumn, we had the winter rain. Now, the Yoreh, the winter rain, that softened the ground up for the ploughing and the new sowing for the new season. And the spring rain, the Malkush, that finished, just matured the crop, just gave it that last little bit of rain it needed in order for the wheat to be ready to begin to be harvested. And during Pentecost, they'd bring in the first fruits of the first wheat harvest, and they'd wave that before the Lord, and the wave loaves as well, made of wheat. So here's another picture of the harvest cycle. And if you're from Australia or New Zealand or the Southern Hemisphere, the seasons are back to front, or we could say our seasons are back to front. But if you're in the Northern Hemisphere in America, then these seasons will be very much the same in America. But the rainfall pattern in Israel is very, very specific. There's very little rainfall at all during the summer harvest period, when the fields are white unto harvest. That's this period and this area here, from May to September. It's very, very little rain at all. But during the winter period, in December and in January over here, there's a great deal of rain. Okay, and that's softening the earth, and the crops are growing very, very slowly in the winter, but they're getting green and lush. And then in March we have in April we have the spring, and that's in the month of Nisan. The month of Nisan is about that time, around about April, give or take a bit. And that is when the green ears of the barley are Aviv, and the beginning of the months occurs, Nisan. And then we have the Malkush, the last part of the rain. That's there, just there. And then 4 months later, after the harvest period, summer harvest period, we have the Yoreh. And Pentecost is in that middle period, if you like, that the beginning of the harvest, the summer harvest. So that's the period prophetically we've been in for the last 2,000 years or so. And we're just about to come to the gathering in of the wheat, bringing the wheat into the barn, bringing the house of Israel back into the land. So this is not the resurrection of the dead. This is not what's called the rapture. It's the physical regathering of Israel back into the land.